Our story begins with our protagonist thinking that if there is a hell, it would be the place he was currently in while someone is trying to shield him from the arrows. The man, weakly calling him Your Highness Baron, fell to his shoulder and with breaking voice told him that he did everything he could. If at least they could repay him, it would be worth it. However, Baron just shouted the name Kiri, which was the man's name, and begged Kiri to pull himself together. He told Kiri to lift his sword again and not stop, but Kiri fell off his shoulder and landed on the ground, dead. He was stunned and in shock, and didn't want to believe that Kiri was dead. He grabbed Kiri's sword and furiously shouted in pain while releasing his power. Kairos was a nation founded by dragons and humans. Kairos asked for a treasure that his homeland, Sekrisha, possessed, called the Axis of Time, but they rejected their proposal, and it was the beginning of his homeland's final war. Our protagonist's name is Baron Sekrisha, the King of Sekrisha. One of his enemies shouted to his comrade that there was only one person left and they should do it for the glory of Kairos. Then they attacked him with powerful spells, but he knew that it was already too late, and he could feel that his death was nearing, but he knew that he couldn't allow something like that. Then he told his enemy to stop his tracks, and when the huge and powerful spell attack neared him, he just swung his sword behind and slashed the powerful spell in half, knowing that he was the blade of Sekrisha. But then the Kairos magician core, called Valken, walked closer to him, and he knew that the person who started all of this was the Mad King of Kairos, Planche. He was furious, knowing that they turned his motherland into hell. Then the Valken stopped in front of him, and the man told him that it was nice to meet him, then introduced himself as the commander of Valken, Arson, and asked him for his name. But he replied that he had forgotten it all, and he was just a blade that served the king while launching towards Arson to attack. But Arson just smiled and showed his crystal power while telling him that he will remember him, then attacked him with the crystal, knowing that he was the king of Sekrisha. He was about to die when, at that moment, he saw his entire life, the fall of his beloved motherland, and the moment all light disappeared. But then, someone told him that he needed to wake up now and called him Prince. His butler asked him if he had a sweet dream while the maid served him tea, but he just sat up, and his butler told him that he needed to hurry because Prince Planche had already left. He was shocked to hear it and asked if he said Planche. Then he told his butler that his arm was cut off, making his butler shocked and asking him why he would say such a horrible thing. The maids were shocked too and asked why his arm was cut off when he was perfectly fine and if he had a nightmare. But then he groaned in pain, making his butler panic and ask him if he was okay. But he remembered clearly that Planche was the name of the man he hated to the bone. Still, he noticed that his arm had reappeared. The attendants he had never seen before were surrounding him, and the memories that were not his were filling up his brain. Then he called his butler Yan and asked who he was, making Yan confused and replied that he was Kallian Rain Kairos. He was shocked to hear it, knowing that Kallian was the third prince of Kairos, and thought that it was a very horrific nightmare. His whole body shakes when he hears the last name Kairos and wonders what happened to those people. Then he panicky asked Yan what the date was today, and Yan confusedly replied that it was currently the 28th of April. Then he asked which year it was, and Yan replied that it was the year 522. Then asked him if there was something wrong. But he didn't answer because he couldn't believe it. He knew that it was a decade before the last war. The war started from the Axis of Time, and the Axis of Time just once, a strange object that possessed the power to turn back time that suddenly appeared in the royal palace of Sekrisha. But word spread quickly and the continent's ruler Kairos began to covet the Axis of Time as well. He remembered before that they were in the meeting with his people panicky asking what they mean that Kairos demanded for the Axis of Time to be handed over to him because even though they know that Kairos may be a great force, the Axis of Time clearly belongs to them. Then they rejected Kairos' request at once, and they went to war with them as if they had been wanting for it. His brother Chase cryingly begs him not to go because everyone who went to war is dead, and he can't lose the rest of them, making him guess that on that day, Chase must have witnessed his death, and he remembers Chase shouting in despair that if only he could go back to a time before that horrible object appeared. Remembering it, he was stunned at first because he couldn't believe it, but then he immediately got off his bed, making Yan shocked and asked him where he was going. He straightaway opened the window, guessing that by any chance, what if Chase used the Axis of Time to turn back time, and what if Chase gave him one last chance to prevent the end of his motherland Sekrisha? Yan told him that he understood that it must be hard for him to participate in the breakfast gathering, but they could not delay it any longer, and he replied okay. Then apologized to them for making them wait and told them that he'll get ready right away while thinking that if it was for the sake of making the best of that opportunity, he'll make sure to survive as a prince of Kairos. A moment later, the dining hall opened while someone told everyone that Kallian, the third prince, shall have their meal now. Then they entered the room. Yan whispered an apology to him and told him that he should have hurried a bit more if he knew that Prince Randell, the first prince, would be there first. The three princes of Kairos were all half-brothers and belonged to the bloodline of the holy state of Tencel, but by the king's orders, breakfast was prepared for three princes every morning, but as per the memories in his mind, he has always. Then he bowed and apologized for his tardiness to Randall, but Randall just drank his tea like he didn't hear him. But he knows that Callian treated him as if he didn't exist. Still, he can't believe that Randall ignored him so blatantly, so he feels like shit. When he is seated, he wonders if he is the only sibling who isn't there now. Suddenly, someone barges into the dining hall while someone shoutingly telling them that Planche, the second prince, shall have his meal now. Planche straightaway seated on the chair, making him shocked and wondered what member of royalty in the world wanders around in that state, and if he was really the mad King Planche that he knew of. Planche silently looked at the maid at his side while he was thinking that judging from Planche's attire, he guessed they meant mad in a different sense. Then he looked at Randall on his side and thought that if he remembered correctly, the first prince can't mess with the second prince because Kyrus's present queen is Planche's biological mother, and no one inside the royal palace would dare defy her authority. He drank his tea frustrated, thinking about how he'll survive in a place like it, but then Planche looked at him and called him imprudent. When he looked at Planche, he was looking down but telling him that not a drop of decency is in him. But after all, he takes after his mother, making him grit his teeth in anger, but he knows that he must endure because he can't let the chance that Chase made for him go to waste. Still, he keeps feeling something rising up within him all the way to his throat. Then he remembered that Planche ruined Kyrus as the man who tore his motherland to pieces, and he wants to slit that throat right that instant without realizing that he was furiously glaring at Planche, making Planche shocked. Then Planche threw his cup of tea on the floor in anger and asked him how dare he glare at him like that. Randall slammed his cup of tea on the table and told them that it was enough. Planche looked at Randall and he saw Randall looking at Callian. Then Planche looked back at him and saw him staring at him in anger, making him poised, and angrily shouted that he was leaving and that he didn't have an appetite anymore because of those disgusting blood-colored eyes. Randall stood up and told him to watch his behavior because soon enough, it would be His Majesty the King's birthday. Then asked him if he intended to create a ruckus so close to such a special day. He was pissed, smiled, and wondered if Randall was saying that the situation was his fault, not that bastard Planche who just up and left. Yan asked him if he was okay and if he was hurt anywhere. Then Yan wiped his shoes while telling him that not a day goes by without something happening, making him at ease because he thinks at least he has a loyal servant who takes care of him like his own body, despite witnessing the lowly treatment he receives every day. Then he held Yan's shoulder and thanked him for caring about him. Yan was surprised to see him because normally Callian would have just silently cried. But now he was smiling. Kyrus' first queen, Dragon Sisfanian. She had hair as dark as the night sky and eyes like sacred flames. Callian was the only prince to have inherited her exterior traits, but the powers he had were pitiful. Callian always tries to hide his red eyes since Planche hates them, and the cause of such obsessive behavior is Prince Planche, who constantly tells Callian that he has disgusting blood-like eyes. He feels a bit unpleasant because he feels like he is peeking into someone else's memories, but to always hide Callian's eyes because he was scared of someone like Planche is idiotic. Yan asked him what was wrong and if there was something he'd like him to do. He replied no and that they should go back now. Yan told him that he was acting strange today and asked him if he perhaps read a novel about a night last night, but he replied no. He knows that the third prince was born to a concubine of peasant roots, so he was afraid of many things and did not have anyone to support him. He was a weak individual who did not even have the power to protect himself, and it was Callian's current situation. But then he stopped walking when he remembered the time before the coming-of-age ceremony, and asked Yan how old he was. Yan confusedly replied that he'll turn 15 in 4 months, and he remembered that Callian was assassinated. Callian tried to poison Queen Celis and failed, so he hung himself out of fear of punishment. But it was only what the public was told, but no one believed that to be the truth, making him realize that someone was going to come for him soon. He walked speedily, making Yan panic and shout, begging him to slow down. But he knows that there is about a month or two before Callian's death, and he thinks when he doesn't know what happened to his original body, he can't just do nothing and wait. When Yan was about to say something to him, he just ordered Yan to give him scissors, making Yan confused, but still giving him a sharp pair of scissors. He excitedly looked at it while Yan asked him what he needed scissors for. He opened the scissors while smiling and put them on his bangs while telling Yan that it was to change things. He cut his hair while thinking that if there is a predetermined future, he'll just twist it, making the maid and Yan shocked in horror. Yan asked him what he was doing and told him that Planche was going to hate it, but he replied that he can't live like an idiot forever just because Planche hates things about him, and told them not to worry because it is okay, and that he'll take care of things. The next day, in the dining hall, Planche told him that he was out of his mind, but he just smiled while Yan was stunned in fear and wondering if it was what Callian meant when he said he'll take care of things. Then Planche walked into the dining hall and sat down in front of him. He was about to call him Bloody Eyes, but he said his name was Callian and gracefully told Planche that his name was Callian. Planche, with a smile, told him that he should call him that while grabbing the bread knife from the table. Then Blanche looked at him angrily and threw the golden bread knife toward him, shocking the maids. The bread knife flew toward Yan, who was afraid, but he just looked at it as it got closer to Yan. Then it stabbed someone, and blood dripped onto the floor. Fortunately, he grabbed the knife with his hand, and blood started coming out of it. Yan, panicking, shouted that his hand was injured and the injuries were severe, but he just glared at Blanche with his red eyes. Blanche, teasingly, said that his hand slipped and Callion's hand was hurt. But he just smiled, walked toward Blanche, and put the bread knife back on Blanche's side, telling him that he was fine. Blanche was stunned and disbelieving as he told him he was fine, leaving the bloody gold bread knife on the table. A moment later, they were in the room treating his wounds. Yan, worried, told him that he thought they should call a healer, but he replied no because it was only a small cut. Yan tried to insist, but he stopped him and asked why he didn't dodge earlier when he knew the attack was headed for him. And what would he have done if he hadn't blocked it when he should have been able to avoid an attack like that? But Yan, worried, told him that if he dodged, Blanche might have used it as an excuse to harm him. He smiled, hearing this, and thanked Yan, then explained that he bled. But his heart was pounding, so he might be able to calm down if he washed his face. He ordered them that no one should come in, but Yan told him to wait because he would help him. But he firmly told Yan that he would do it alone and not even think of calling a healer while he was gone, making Yan worriedly call his name defeatedly. He looked behind the curtain and saw Yan, worried, wondering why he couldn't call a healer. But he remembered that earlier, he was about to subconsciously use aura for Blanche's attack, but he felt a sudden pain in his heart. So he thought he should reenact that situation and confirm Callion's body's condition. Then he focused on his body and was shocked that he could feel 3 mana circles in the vicinity of the heart. He couldn't believe it and asked Callion if he was a magician. A few days later, he looked at his side, knowing that it had already been 3 days, but Yan was still panicking and worried, telling him that his injuries were still the same. But he calmly reminded Yan that he said he was fine, but Yan still wanted to insist when the man gracefully told him that the preparations were complete. Seton Slake, the royal tailor, greeted him and was about to introduce himself, but Slake stopped in shock when he saw him, making him ask Slake what was wrong. Slake apologized to him and explained that he didn't mean to, but Yan was furiously shouting Slake's name, making Slake sincerely apologize to him. But he was tired of that reaction after cutting his hair. Callion, who suffered for a long time because he looked similar to the mother he had never met, started to hate looking at his face to the point of getting rid of all the mirrors in his room. He told Slake that it was fine and he knew that he looked like Freya, then ordered Slake to do what he was doing while Yan looked at Slake angrily from behind. Slake told him that he should let him take his measurements first. Then Slake proceeded to measure him and told him that he needed to eat more because he was worried about how small he was, but he replied that he was eating well. Still, he knew that his body would make others worry. He also knew that Kyra's royal family are descendants of dragons and, to be exact, they are descendants of 2 of the 8 herds who sealed the evil god, Hachara and Sisfanian. Sisfanian gave the direct line of Kyra's royalty the power of healing and the ability of magic called Sisfanian's blessing. In other words, Callion's injury should have healed a long time ago, yet it hasn't, and every time he uses mana, he feels a pain in his heart. So he figured out that it is troubling because, at that rate, he won't be able to use aura or magic and will just die when the assassin comes. Slake tells him that he'll bring the clothes he prepared, but he just wonders if there is anyone knowledgeable about mana while Slake tells him that he prepared some clothes that will be perfect for his highness, the king's birthday. He snaps back when he heard the king's birthday, and he knows that the great magician, Ellen Manasel, will be there as well, so he thinks he needs to meet him. Ellen Manasel, he's one of only 3 or 4 people who are 7th circle magicians and the idol of all magicians. In the past, Ellen Manasel was invited to the king's birthday and visited Kairos, and the stories of how a certain incident led him to be refused at the door reached the neighboring nation, Sekrisha. Ellen Manasel, who couldn't participate in the festivities, was raised to an 8th circle great magician 10 years later as the only magician to do so on the continent and proved his abilities. So he knows that there is no one like Ellen when it comes to knowledge of mana, and Ellen will be able to help him with Callion's body problem. He doesn't know what that certain incident is, but Kairos doesn't treat magicians well, so he wonders if he'll agree to his request. Also, the reason that countless knights traverse the Kairos kingdom is due to the influence of Blanche's mother's family, the Bryson family. Even if it was just to keep Bryson's power in check, he needed the power of magicians. So if he can bring Ellen onto his side, he might be able to stop the war that Blanche will start. But he knows that before that, he should deal with Yan, Slake, and the maid excitedly looking at his clothes ribbon design for the king's birthday party like he was a child or a baby. He firmly told them that no ribbons or frills, making them shocked and ask why, but he just asked them back if they thought he'd be okay with lace and just what they were trying to make. A few more days passed, and he was relaxingly drinking his tea. He was getting a little used to that life now, and his hand had almost completely healed. Also, Planche has been outwardly ignoring him since, which is better for him. Yan told him that in the morning, he had horseback riding lessons, and in the afternoon, he had dinner plans with the Queen and Viscount Bryson. He asked Yan if he heard Viscount Bryson right. Yan replied yes and told him that he thinks it was because of the king's birthday plans making him realize that he would have had to bump into him eventually. Yan asked him if he was going to train his stamina today as well, and he replied that even if it was stamina training, it was just running in front of the lake beside the palace, so he shouldn't worry too much because nothing could happen there. A minute later, he was tiredly trying to catch his breath on the training ground. But he was still running even though he felt like he was going to die, making the girl behind him worriedly call him. Callion's maid and the second daughter of the external defense commander, Marilyn Fiat, asks him if he is okay and tells him that on the first day, 4.5 laps, on the third day, 4 laps, and that day he only had 3 laps, making him silent. He knows that he is exercising, but his stamina is falling, so he notices that there is a problem. Marilyn asked him what he thought about calling the healer if it was very hard. But he replied no and that it was okay because he knew that if he called a healer, the mana circles would be exposed right away when even Yan was unaware that Callion is a magician, so his life could be endangered if he acts recklessly. Then he told Marilyn that his stamina had fallen, so there was no use for a healer, but Marilyn worriedly tried to insist. Still, he fakingly and shakingly told her that he was fine and he'd get better as time passed. But then someone shouted not to look away, read the direction of the blade, and get his mind together, making them look in the sound direction and saw the knights were training. The captain of the knights shouted to them not to look away from the blade and pointed to one of the knights to shoutingly tell him that if it was the battlefield, he'd be dead. Then the captain shoutingly orders them not to hesitate and follow through. He excitedly looks at the knight and says that it reminds him of old times, but Marilyn worriedly tells him that it is the training ground of the Pable Knight Corps. He replied that he knew and he was watching because it was interesting, making Marilyn shocked and asking how he, who has no ties to the sword, found it interesting. He told Marilyn that he could have gained interest just now, but Marilyn asked him if he didn't know what kind of place the Pable Knight Corps was. He replied that they were the Royal Knight Corps and, to be exact, they were the Knight Corps of the Bryson family, which keeps the king's power in check. But then someone asks him who he is, and the Pable Knight Corps commander, Pable, told him that if they have no business there, they should leave because the knights are bothered by his gazes and can't train properly. Marilyn shoutingly told Pable to show some respect because the person he was talking to was the third prince, Callion. But Pable teasingly acted like he just figured out who he was and smilingly told him that he thought he was some rat bastard who was secretly watching. But he just looked at Pable in silence. He smiled in a pissed off manner, wondering what on earth was happening now. Marilyn angrily told Pable he was in front of the prince, so how could he say something so imprudent? Pable just replied that he almost mistook him and asked why he was being so sensitive about it, and when he's about to say something more. Pable was shocked and scared when he saw him glaring at him angrily with his red eye, making Pable wonder what it was, since back then, Callion was definitely different. Then he remembered angrily asking Callion what he was doing and why he blocked his way when he was on his way out after being summoned by the queen. Callion, shaking, apologized to him and said he would get out of the way right away. This made him remember that Callion was a weak, discreet prince, so he wondered what was up with Callion's newfound spirit. Then he walked toward Pable and asked him something. He then firmly asked Pable about his duty, which stunned Pable and the knights, and made them ask Pable if there was something that mattered. Then the knight saw the third prince and asked what on earth he was doing there, thinking it was a nuisance. This made Pable think that Callion was just the third prince that even the knights looked down on. Then Pable, teasingly, told him that, as he could see, they were in the middle of training, so he couldn't answer him, and ordered him to continue his tasks. Marilyn worriedly looked at him, but he just called Pable and firmly reminded him that he was asking him a question, and ordered Pable to tell him what his duty was, which stunned Marilyn, the knights, and Pable. Pable, worried, looked at the two shocked knights behind him and replied that his duty was to strengthen the royal family's forces, and to protect the royal family and the kingdom. He grabbed a tree branch while telling Pable that he was right about strengthening and protecting. But he was a failure at both of the duties he just mentioned while breaking the tree branch and walking closer to them. Pable, pissed, asked him what he was talking about, and he replied that first, strengthen the royal family's force, but if he was to describe what he had observed so far, his training was a complete mess. Then he disappeared, making Pable shocked, but appeared behind Pable's back. Pable knew that if he failed to block that attack, he was going to die, so he grabbed his sword and used it to block his attack. Pable couldn't believe that he was struggling with just a mere tree branch. He saw it and smiled, then let go of the tree branch, and the sword snapped to Pable's hand, rolled in the air, and fell to the ground. He told Pable that he couldn't believe he couldn't predict the movements of someone like him, who hadn't held a sword even once, so he was quite disappointed. He told Pable that the second duty, protecting the royal family and kingdom, involves calling a member of the royal family in a derogatory manner and hurting a prince by wielding a sword against him. Then he firmly asked Pable if he should consider it treason, making Pable stunned in fear while wondering if Callian was really the third prince that he knew of. Then Pable kneeled to the ground and apologized to him, explaining that he wasn't thinking clearly and didn't intend to commit treason at all. Then he begged him to forgive him, but the truth is Pable couldn't believe that he was humiliated by the worthless third prince and swore that he would never forget that humiliation. A moment later, Yan asked him why someone who said he was there for stamina training came with a horse, but he just smiled at Yan while holding a black horse. He gave the horse to Yan and walked away while telling Yan that he picked it up on his way there and the horse's name was Raven. Yan, struggling to hold Raven, asked him where he had been and how he ended up fetching a horse. Before it, after all the commotion settled down, he asked the knights what was up with that horse, and one of the knights replied that Prince Planche failed to tame that horse and, as he could see, the horse was quite ferocious. He smiled at the horse and it ended up with Yan angrily asking him if it was really okay for him to just bring Prince Planche's horse like that. He replied that Planche said anyone could use Raven, finders keepers, but he whisperingly told Marilyn to keep the incident at the training ground a secret. Yan, worried, told him that if Planche found out about it, it would be big trouble, but he reminded Yan that he was telling him it was fine and if something happened. But then he felt pain in his heart, making Yan and Marilyn panic, as he thought he had used his body too much. Yan, worried, asked him if stamina training wouldn't be too much for him today, and he replied that it was nothing like that, and he just had a good time playing around with someone after quite a while. Yan, panicked, asked him who he was playing with, but he just told Yan that at that rate, he would be late for dinner so they should get ready quickly, to which Yan replied that he would hurry up and asked what he should do about the horse for now. Then Yan asked him if Raven doesn't bite, but he replied that he wasn't sure about it either, without them noticing someone spying on them. The spy reported the incident to someone, and that someone thought it was interesting. She or he heard that even worms writhe when stepped on, so it was fitting. Then that someone crushed the flower she or he was holding while saying that even if someone like Callian tries to writhe, one can't change their origins. It wouldn't be fun just to press and kill him, so it worked out, and they should watch for now. Meanwhile, in the dining hall, he was frustrated and stressed because he couldn't adjust to the atmosphere there, even though he experienced it every day. Then he looked at Planche and wondered why that bastard was so low on energy today. He wondered if the Queen and Viscount Bryson being late was Planche's fault because he couldn't control his expression. He guessed Planche was still a child. Suddenly, someone entered the dining hall, and he was shocked to smell the scent because he knew that Celis Bryson, the second queen and Kyra's current queen, was finally there, the true power behind the kingdom. After the previous queen passed away from illness, Celis, who rose to that position, borrowed the power of her family, Bryson, and seized control of the Royal Knights Corps. The majority of the nobles also supported the Bryson family, so each day, Celis's power grew, and the powerless third prince, Callian, became laughable even to a mere commander. Viscount Bryson told Celis that they should deal with Commander Pable like that, and Celis agreed. She told him they should pay adequate compensation, to which the Viscount replied he understood. However, Celis also told him not to report every little thing like that in the future and seriously asked if she must pay attention to such trivial things. When all were seated at the table, Celis called him and told him that he had grown much as of late. He smiled because he expected that reaction and replied that he didn't grow much, but he would be sure to grow more in the future. This made Planche and Randall shocked, but Celis just glared at him in silence. Then Viscount broke the silence by telling him that, of course, he would grow more, but whether he had grown much or not, he almost didn't recognize him. Now that he was showing his face, it was quite nice to see, so he should have cut his hair sooner. Viscount Renan Bryson, the Marquis Bryson's second son, also told him that since he was still in a period of growth, he would surely grow taller. Celis angrily called her brother, making Renan panic, and he excusingly ordered the maid to hurry and bring out the food because he was hungry. This made him not believe that the owner of the Bryson Emporium was so slow-witted and noticed that things were just as the rumors said. Then Celis looked at her side and called Planche to ask why he didn't tell her, but Planche asked her what he should say to her. She replied that it was about how his horse doesn't follow him. He looked at her in shock at first and looked away with a disgusting smile like he knew something. Celis told Planche that it would have been nice if he had told her ahead of time, but Planche told her she was already aware. Still, she told Planche that he didn't tell her it had completely left his grasp, making Planche pissed. He replied that it was a useless horse to begin with while throwing the fork he was holding. Then he told everyone he would take his leave first and walked away, leaving Celis pissed. 3 weeks later, the annual King's birthday celebration arrived. and the people were panicking because they knew that since it was their highness's birthday celebration, they needed to prepare it all without any mistakes. The people in the street were amazed to see a congratulatory delegation sent by the elves to the king and thought the birthday banquet would surely be fancy. They guessed that the princes must be busy preparing at that very moment. On the other hand, in the castle, he was busy in his room being measured by Slake. Slake was confused, looking at his meter, and Tearingly was about to ask him if he had been eating. But Slake was shocked in horror when he saw him bleeding from his nose. Yan and the maids immediately ran toward him in worry. Yan ordered the maid to hurry and bring some fabric, but he told Yan that it was fine and it was not that bad. Then he explained that it was because he hadn't slept properly lately, but Yan, shoutingly, told him that it was not the problem. Slake tearfully apologized to him for being presumptuous because it wasn't all, and told him that he had lost more weight because he definitely wasn't that skinny 3 weeks ago. But he just smilingly asked Slake if he really lost that much and if he had been exercising too much lately. But he knows that he had been working hard, but his stamina kept getting worse, and seeing how pain when he used mana was still there, he figured out that there must be some problem with his heart. Slake angrily told him that it wasn't something he should speak about so lightly and asked him if he had received a checkup. But he replied that it was not bad, so he didn't need a checkup for a small nosebleed. But he was frustrated and asked himself why he had to get a nosebleed in front of so many people. Slake, worriedly, told him that it was not just the nosebleed, but he still smilingly assured them that he was really fine. But he knew that he won't be able to pass by that easily. But he was shocked when he heard Yan telling him that he knew it and it was because he was picking his nose yesterday, and that it must have been difficult to tell everyone about such a personal hobby. He was stunned in horror to hear it and asked Yan what he was talking about, while the maid and Slake didn't expect that he had a secret hobby like it. But then Yan reminded everyone that, as he had said before, their Prince Callian was eating and exercising well, so the nosebleed must be because of his hobby, so they shouldn't worry too much. Slake happily told Yan that if he said it, then there would be no issues since he knew the prince best. Yan winked at him happily, but he was stunned by Yan's actions and words. Before it, Yan asked him if he was really okay because he was not looking very well. He thinks the worse his body condition gets, the more it feels like he is about to faint. So after he explains to Yan that he could use magic and that it was due to a mana issue, Yan decides to ruin his image like it. But he was relieved that they got it over with like that thanks to Yan. Then Slake told him that he will mend the clothes as he said. However, the issue is the lack of time, but Yan tells Slake that it won't be an issue because the prince has other things to do, so he has more time until the event. Slake left in relief and told them that he'll mend the clothes for the event that will take place in the afternoon first, while Yan called him in a whisper to ask if it was today. He nodded his head, knowing that at that rate, the condition of his health will be known throughout the whole place. So before it, that night he needs to meet Ellen Manisel at all costs. A moment later, the butler told him that due to the urgent business the king had to deal with, the prince's luncheon had been cancelled. Instead, they will replace that with meeting everyone one by one, making him confused and wonder if they don't even have time to meet together. But the king wants them to meet one by one, and if it isn't more effective to meet everyone all at once. The butler guided him to the room while thinking that he didn't expect a private meeting, so he was a bit nervous. The butler opened the door for him and told him to come in because the king was waiting. Then he walked inside the room and saw Ramain Larun Kairos, the king of Kairos. He gracefully greeted the king, and when he lifted his head, he was shocked that the king was ignoring him. He knew that even if he was ignorant of Kairos etiquette, he was well aware that it was rude. But then the king told him to come sit there. When he was about to sit, he congratulated the king on his 38th birthday. The king replied yes and asked him how had he been. But before he can answer, the king emotionlessly told him that he looked good, making him pissed, and remembered Slake. Yan and his maids worriedly cared for him, making him think that even the passing attendants know how he has rapidly become emaciated. But now he knows why the king wants to see them one by one, even though they don't have time, because if the king meets all three sons at once, the king needs to focus on making conversation. So that's why meeting one at a time is more efficient, since even spending time on his sons who are there to congratulate him on his birthday is a waste. Also, he realized that the more he got to know that family, the more of a mess it was. A father who doesn't care about his sons, the first prince who is indifferent to everything, the second prince who knows no etiquette. A woman walked in and the king told her that she was late, but Celis sweetly replied yes and explained that it happened like it. But he knew that she was the queen who had enough power to look down on the king, and among them, there is someone trying to kill him. He looked at them and wondered who sent an assassin for him. A moment later, they were busy waving to the people outside. Those people were whispering about a rumor. At the square event just now, Prince Callian had appeared before the people, looking completely different. This was especially true when compared to the second prince, who looked completely drunk. Some people thought this change didn't matter. They believed others were making a big deal out of it. However, they also realized something was different now compared to the past. When the hall doors opened, an announcer shouted that the third prince, Callian Rain Kairos, was entering. He walked into the hall, and the people were shocked. The rumors were true. The prince, with black hair and red eyes, who resembled someone from Sisfanian, stood before them. The nobles noticed changes in Callian too. He had trimmed the bangs that once covered his face and was wearing a red brooch. They thought this might mean Callian was done hiding. Yan quietly asked him why everyone was staring, then looked around and continued, asking why they were focusing on his outfit. Yan believed it was because Callian looked outstanding in it. Slake would have been pleased to see him in it. But Callian told Yan that people were surprised to see the third prince wearing such jewels. He asked Yan if he understood how tough it was to pick them out. If he had chosen even more, reactions might have been stronger. Still, Yan insisted that the prince looked fantastic. Callian didn't argue, knowing Yan and Slake didn't really understand the significance of the brooch they had picked without much thought. A minute later, as they walked, Callian asked Yan to confirm if his family lived in Kairos, the capital of Kairos. Yan was surprised Callian remembered. He replied that his little sister and father were in their hometown, but the rest of his family lived in Kairos. Callian wondered if Yan's family would visit the royal palace. Yan said they would if invited. However, Yan then asked when a raven should be ready in the garden, hinting at something he didn't want to reveal. Callian told Yan they should be patient because there was someone he wanted to meet. This caught Yan off guard, making him curious about who that might be. Instead of answering, Callian asked Yan if he knew the story behind the name of the ballroom, the Siegfried Hall. Yan said he did. He explained that it was named after Duke Quitro's Han Siegfried, one of the 8 heroes of the Two-Way War and the first patriarch. Callian was aware that the Siegfrieds were the only duke family in Kairos. Even with their immense power, they had remained loyal to the royal family for over 500 years, committed to defending the Sisfanian territory. He was deeply impressed to hear the story when he was Baron. Yan whispered and asked him if the person he wanted to see by any chance was there, and he happily replied that the person he wanted to see was. But then someone laughed loudly and shouted that Siegfried's summer night is always a classic. Yan told him that the person he wanted to see happened to be right there, and that person was Duke Slayman Han Siegfried. He knows that the Siegfried family has such long-standing loyalty, which is the type of person he likes. Then he releases his aura to check how sharp Slayman was. Slayman felt an aura behind him and immediately looked back to check. Then he saw Callian with Yan in the corridor, looking at him. Callian expected that Slayman would find him instantly, even though he only let a tiny bit flow. Yan whispered and told him that it looked like Slayman was showing interest in him. But he knew that Slayman was one of the 5 swordmasters of the continent, so there was no way Slayman wouldn't pick up on it. Then he told Yan that he was quite grateful for it, but it was still too early, so for now, they should act like they didn't notice. Then they left, leaving Slayman looking at them. Then the king thanked everyone for congratulating them and told them to enjoy the night, making the people happily shout for Kairos and cheer with their glasses. On the other hand, he and Yan were going out of the hall in secret. Then he straightaway jumped on Raven's back and told it that, as he expected, it was so smart and gentle. But Yan told him not to be fooled, because when he was not around. But when the knights appeared, Yan continued by saying that Raven is quick-witted and indeed smart. Then they proceeded to walk while Yan asked him to confirm if they just needed to go to the front gate, to which he replied yes. But then the guard knights told someone that he could not enter without an invitation. The man replied that he had come quite a long way to join the festivities. But the guard told the man that he couldn't come in, so he should leave. However, Callian knew that the person he was waiting for was there. Ellen asked the guard if they were sure they were refusing him entry because of the invitation and told them that his name was Ellen Manasel. The guard asked who Ellen Manasel was. Then they looked at each other and decided to do something. One of the guards told Ellen that even if he said it, he needed an invitation. Ellen smiled upon hearing it and told them that Kairos differentiates their guest's class by their appearance, making him shocked and wondering what it was. He knows that it's a problem to differentiate people by how they dress, but he noticed that Ellen Manasel seemed to be nitpicking on purpose, as if he was trying to find a reason not to enter Kairos. Then Ellen turned his horse back while telling the guard that he'd go back, making him surprised. They can't send Ellen back like that, but then Yan shouted and told him that they can't because the king's orders say not to allow anyone outside during the festival. He looked at Ellen, who was riding away, and knew that at that rate, they'd lose him. Then he rode Raven forward while ordering Yan to do anything he could to stop the soldiers. He told Raven that they should go, leaving Yan stunned and shouting after him. The knights told him to stop his horse because going outside wasn't allowed by the king's orders, but he continued riding Raven forward, passing through the shocked knights. One of the knights shouted that the prince had gone outside, and they should prepare the horses and follow him right away. Yan panicked, wondering what to do, but then he remembered Callian firmly ordering him to do anything he could to stop the soldiers. So he told himself to focus because he's Callian's attendant and he has to protect him by any means, it's his responsibility. Then he shouted at the knight to stop and told them that Duke Siegfried had allowed Prince Callian to leave. One of the knights asked him who he was to use the Duke's name so freely, and he replied that he's Saroyan Siegfried, the eldest son of Duke Siegfried. A moment later, inside Kyroses, someone was laughing loudly while slapping his knee next to Yan, who was shyly silent. Yan told that person that it wasn't something to laugh about and called Slayman father in anger and shyness. Slayman apologized to him and explained that he can't believe his son did something so clever. Then Slayman sweetly told him that he was his son who left to raise a little kid and laughingly told him that it was a good decision. But he replied that it wasn't because the king will definitely ruin the relationship between him and the king. Slayman told him that he won't ask, making Yan confused and asking what. Slayman explained to Yan that the king won't ask about it because Remain thinks too much. If the kid just happened to get help from Siegfried, Remain will be put in a position where he's on alert from their goodwill. If there's a relationship and Remain receives help but doesn't receive punishment, it'd be the same as acknowledging the amicable relationship between their family and the prince. Bryce will probably find fault with it if Remain does, so it'll probably be buried as if nothing ever happened, regardless of the reason behind leaving. A moment later, Ellen stops, knowing that Callian is chasing after him. He tells him that it doesn't seem like he's there to criticize him for not having an invitation. Then he asks why the third prince of Kyrus is following this old man. He heard that if they reach the 7th circle, their aging regresses, so it seems he has found just that and asks Ellen if he's just going to go back when it's gotten so late. Ellen replies that when he tried opening a closed door, it seems the threshold was still too high, making him wonder if Ellen is trying to speak backhandedly with him. But he knows that there's nothing he can't do for Ellen. Then he tells Ellen that he's saying it because he went to a closed door when others were open for him, which means he's asking Ellen where he put the invitation given to him, for him to nitpick. Then he tells Ellen that he was so busy blocking the wind that he forgot to clean the dirt on the threshold, which means he didn't expect the guards to make a mistake while trying to keep people out. Ellen is shocked to realize that Callian is not apologizing but criticizing him, making him wonder if Callian is honest or just shameless. Ellen also thinks that he is quite a fun prince and remembers that when he first saw Callian, it didn't seem like the gaze of a 14-year-old. But then he notices how Callian is holding the horse's tie, making him shocked and calling the prince. He then snatches his hand while telling him to excuse him for a moment. Then Ellen releases his power, making him shocked and asking what he's doing. But then he feels pain in his heart, making him growl in pain. He feels that Ellen's mana is flowing into him. Ellen continued to hold his hand, but then Raven stood up in pain. He snatched his hand back and created some distance between himself and Ellen. Ellen told him that even with the door shut, the wind could not be completely blocked. This made Callian realize that he had already noticed the state of his body. He asked Ellen if he meant the wind couldn't be blocked. Then Callian told him that he was right because, from a certain point, he couldn't use mana. However, Ellen disagreed, knowing that the problem wasn't the mana. He wondered if Callian really didn't know that the real problem lay somewhere else. But then Ellen frowned and closed his hand tightly, remembering the Kyrus threat. He thought about how poorly the mages from that family performed, even though they were descendants of dragons. The Great Mage came to that family, and the intention was to make a fool out of them for losing the Great Mage from right under their noses. However, he wondered if he could truly call the meeting with the young prince meaningful, as the prince was facing an uncertain fate. Ellen asked him why he wanted to see him, but he hesitated to reply. Still, he knew Ellen would know if he lied. So he called Ellen by his full name and said that he would like to have that name. He believed his life would be at risk soon. Ellen thought that he was not unaware of the situation the third prince was in. He knew that the prince was hated by all and surrounded by enemies. So he snapped his fingers, and a silence spell surrounded them. He noticed that Ellen cast it without saying anything, leading him to guess that Ellen was indeed a 7th circle mage. Then Ellen asked him if his goal was to simply stop it from happening or if he was trying to eliminate the root cause. He was shocked at first but then replied that for now, he was just trying to prevent it from happening. He also wanted to eliminate the source of the problem, so he was willing to take the throne if needed. Ellen smiled, wondering if the throne was just a means to reach Callian's final goal. He thought about Callian, a prince with nothing but a failing body, a prince who resembled Sisfanian and needed him for his goal. He found it interesting and planned to see what Callian had to offer. He asked Callian to give him the invitation again. Callian smiled upon hearing it, gracefully bent down in front of Ellen, and introduced himself as Callian Rain Kyrus, greeting his mentor. Ellen replied that he was Ellen Manasel and accepted the invitation, thinking he would save Callian. Meanwhile, in Kyroses, Yan asked his father if he was sure that people in the royal palace didn't know who he was. Slayman replied that he had taken care of it, so Yan shouldn't need to worry. Yan mentioned that he probably wouldn't have been able to stay by Prince Callian's side if he were recognized. Slayman happily agreed and said that he was Yan's father. He added that Yan didn't seem royal, but he just quietly asked about Li. Slayman replied that she was doing well as the head of the lower family position he had abandoned. Then Slayman stood up and told Yan that if he wanted to give up being a servant for some kid, he was welcome to come back anytime. Slayman guessed that he wouldn't be seeing him for a while. Yan asked Slayman what he's talking about, and he mentioned that they would see each other again in 3 months. Slayman asked Yan if he was really considering giving up his position as Kallian's servant. Yan squeezed his hands together and said that Kallian would turn 15 soon. But Slayman just looked at him silently for a minute. Then he called him a son and asked if he knew the nickname of their Siegfried family. As Yan was about to reply, Slayman told him that he was right, and it was the elephants of Kyrus. Then Slayman said that they hadn't vied for the throne for a long time, but they were powerful and were called the king of animals, whom even beasts couldn't touch. Confused, Yan asked him why he was suddenly asking, but then Slayman playfully choked him, making him shout in pain. He told Yan that saying his name, which he had sold off, was strong, so he should do everything he wanted to do, making Yan shyly smile. After that, Slayman choked him tightly while sweetly saying that Yan was a bastard who had made him worry. Yan shouted to his father to stop because it really hurt and that he was really going to die. A minute later, he composed himself and addressed his father as Duke Siegfried, but Slayman teasingly told him to bugger off immediately. Yan bowed his head and told his father that he would see him next time. Then he walked away to the left, leaving Slayman calling him stubborn and saying he was definitely a Siegfried. However, he remembered Kallian from the corridor of the hall earlier and wondered when that rascal had grown so much, making him wonder what Kallian was up to. The next day, someone arrived at Kyrus, making the people gather and ask if they were not seeing it wrong, if it was really the crest with 7 red flowers and a silver cane. One noble told everyone that she had heard his contract with Reburin was over, but another asked why he was visiting Kyrus. Someone replied that it was an obvious decision since he had experienced something like it, and if it wasn't for his relationship with the king of Reburin, he would have left already. Others whispered that it must be because of the rumors that Ellen Manassel's son was poisoned. The nobles were shocked when they heard someone get out of the carriage and saw Ellen Manassel coming out of it. Ellen smiled, thinking that his new disciple had done something very cute. He then remembered Kallian happily telling him to arrive at exactly 9:30 a.m. and to come through the open door at that time. He looks around as people whisper nearby, asking if the king is planning to compete with the Bryson family. This makes him realize that Kallian is waiting for the right time to showcase him to the nobles and shake up the game. Then, someone approaches him and mentions being surprised by his sudden visit. The butler and maids gracefully inform him that the king is waiting for him. A minute later, inside the palace, the king asks Ellen what he said and whether he meant to find a place to stay in Kyrus. Ellen replies that it is correct and he indeed needs a place to stay in Kyrus. The king remains silent, understanding that to compete with Celis, he needs a power like Ellen Manassel. However, Ellen offering his help first makes the king wonder about Ellen's intentions. Ellen explains that, to be honest, he saw a black cat with red eyes last night at the plaza, and the cat appeared quite intelligent. So, he thought he should teach it a few things, but he lacked a place to stay. The king asks Ellen what he plans to teach the cat. Ellen replies that he will teach it magic and create an environment the cat will enjoy. To do this, he needs to help the owner of the house and tidy it up a bit. This shocks the king, who hesitantly asks Ellen if he can handle it. Ellen responds that he has decided to take Prince Kallian as his disciple, and Bryson can't stop him. He clarifies that he won't be able to teach magic all day, and if the board master decides to help the king, they can't stop him. Ellen emphasizes that it was all part of Prince Kallian's genuine invitation. The king clenches his hand and tells Ellen that he has provided a place for him to stay. He adds that the house is already a mess, so it couldn't get worse. However, he's curious for some reason, and he heard that the child is not special. Ellen asks the king what he means, knowing that even Kallian's health condition is unusually special to the point where it's hard to find anything normal. The king explains that he heard Kallian had many fears. To think that Kallian, who was apparently even scared of horses, chased after him is unbelievable. The king notes that if Kallian were outstanding, he would have heard about it. This makes Ellen notice and wonder why the king has only been discussing what he had heard. Then Ellen asks the king if he happens to know the prince's height. But the king just looked at him, frozen, making him realize that, as he thought, the king doesn't know anything. So he told the king that at times, attention can be a poison and indifference can be a remedy. However, he knows well that being busy is just an excuse. The king was silently shocked upon hearing Ellen's words and angrily told Ellen that he'll take his current attitude of not knowing his place to be his concerns Kallian's teacher. But then the king told him that it was ridiculous for him to have to explain it, but he cherishes the prince quite enough. Especially that child, Kallian, is already precious to him. When the king was about to tell him that he suggested they end that discussion, He snapped his fingers, and silent magic surrounded them. Then he angrily told the king in disrespect to stop chit-chatting and that he should take a look. The king was shocked and asked him, what the hell is he doing and how can he use magic in the royal palace? But he just told the king that Callion's lips were dry and his breathless. Also, Callion's skin has a bluish tinge to it, and his fingernails look purplish underneath. Callion's clothes were clearly fixed in a hurry, and considering the fact that Callion's clothes were prepared a month ago, Callion must have lost a lot of weight in the meantime. Callion tried standing up, unable to raise his body with his eyes closed, and Callion felt dizzy. The king can't believe what he is seeing, but Ellen tells him that if he keeps being a bystander like it, he will lose it all. On the other hand, the maid saw Yan and told him that it was almost noon, yet the prince still hadn't had his morning tea. Yan smilingly told the maid to give it to him, and he'll take care in case the prince coughs. Then Yan entered Callion's room while holding the tea, but he saw Callion still sleeping, making him wonder if yesterday was a bit too hard on him. When Yan is about to wake Callion, Ellen appears behind Yan and asks if Callion is still not awake yet. Yan looked back and froze in shock to see Ellen, then shouted in panic that he almost broke the tea set he was holding and asked Ellen where he is. Then Yan stopped Ellen from walking closer to Callion and asked how he can act so discourteously. Ellen replied that they said outsiders can't enter Chermal Palace without permission. Yan asked Ellen if he teleports because he didn't have permission, and Ellen replied that it was a warp and it was a bit more difficult. But, as he could see, he was quite good at magic. But Yan shoutedly told Ellen that it was not important right now and told him to leave because the prince's health is still not good. But Ellen just asked him to confirm if he knows him and told him that he came to Reburn a few years ago. Then he asked him if he thinks he wouldn't recognize him just because he grew up and called him Baby Elephant. He remembers his father assuring him not to worry because he didn't look all that elegant, so no one would suspect him. However, he got caught way too quickly. Then Callion woke up and asked Yan how long he slept, but Yan just pointed at Ellen and told him he had a guest. When he was about to ask who it was, he saw his teacher. A moment later, Ellen gave him something and ordered him to take it. He opened it while asking what it was, but Ellen just told him to make sure to eat one daily without forgetting. He asked Ellen if it was medicine, but Ellen just told him that currently, he was facing two issues. One is that he can't manage his mana, and the second is that his body is thinning extremely rapidly. He told Ellen that he didn't even say anything, yet he always seems to see through what is happening with him. Ellen asks him if he has the power of the blessing, and he replies that he is right and explains that the power gives him healing ability and an affinity for magic, although he feels like even that healing power is somehow gone now. Then he asks Ellen if he might have a problem with his heart, but Ellen just asks him if he has never thought of that as a strange combination of the blend of healing powers and magic. He replied that he had wondered if perhaps the power of the blessing strengthened his heart because after all, the origin of both mana and life is the heart. Ellen told him that he was right and the power of the blessing does strengthen the heart, but his power of blessing didn't disappear, neither did his heart malfunction, nor was his mana blocked. He asks what it was then, but Ellen just asks him if he had never thought of what if Sisfanian's blessing hadn't disappeared but is being used to its limits somewhere else. He was shocked to hear it, knowing that the power of the blessing is being affected by something, such that it can't even heal the tiniest wounds. He clenched his hand in anger and asked Ellen if it was poison. Ellen replied that without the blessing, he would already be dead. He explained that healing such a deadly poison strained his heart, and the healing power was at its limit. On top of that, he tried to use mana, causing his heart to reject it. He remained silent upon hearing this, knowing that Callion was originally assassinated but was already poisoned before he even possessed his body. It was not something planned shortly before it was carried out, which made him wonder why they had to hang the child who was going to die anyway. Ellen was surprised to see the aura Callion was releasing. He noticed that it wasn't the kind of bloodthirstiness a 14-year-old boy could possess. He wondered what Callion really was, as Callion asked him if the thing he was holding must be the antidote. Ellen confirmed and explained that it was rushed, but he was sure it would work. Callion grabbed the antidote and asked Ellen what would happen if he took both the poison and the antidote together. This shocked Ellen, and he shouted, telling him that even if he took the antidote along with the poison, the antidote would only slow down its effect. Callion replied that it was good enough. Ellen shouted back, asking if he really intended to take both and if he perhaps knew who the culprit was. Callion replied yes and said he had an inkling. He told Ellen that he thought the source of the poison was the tea he drank every morning. He drank it in front of everyone, making it easy to see that he had consumed it. No one else drank tea with him, so they probably thought it was the safest method. Callion suspected that he noticed what was happening to his body and rejected the poison tea. This might be the reason why he ended up being assassinated. He also thought the situation had changed after he possessed Callion's body, so he didn't know what method they might have used to try and kill him. At the very least, he told Ellen that until he figured out the method, He needed to keep it all a secret. Ellen asks him if it was really the only reason, and he replies that if it gets out that the morning tea was the problem, then Yan and the other servants will be at risk. The culprit had been doing that regularly, so he was sure that meant they were certain they wouldn't be caught. Ellen looked away and silently said that the baby elephant would be just fine. He asks Ellen what he said, but Ellen replies that it was nothing. Then Ellen told him that he understood it and asked him what he will do now. Then he remembered his father calling him foolish and telling him that to take someone else's trump card, he needed to offer something of his first. This made him tell his father that at times like this, he was reminded of him. Then he told Ellen that tomorrow evening, he should escort him outside the palace. Meanwhile, in other buildings of Kairos, the butler panicky barges into Planche's room telling him that he must wake up because the queen has arrived. But then the queen orders the butler to move, swings the curtain open, and asks Planche if he doesn't think that it is already late to be prepared for afternoon schedules. Planche remains silent, but then she smells that he reeks of alcohol, making her angrily ask him if he still hasn't gotten it together despite being banned from drinking at the square ceremony. Planche grabs the glass of water on his table while asking her why she's there and tells her to just answer it and leave, making her bite her lips in anger. She tells him that apparently, Callian has taken on a mentor, and the mentor is the 7th Circle mage, Ellen Manasel. Also, the aristocrats are already wavering, but he simply asks his mother, so what? This makes his mother firmly tell him to make sure all the effort she invested in him doesn't go to waste and orders him to get ready immediately. Then the queen orders the maid and butler to proceed while telling Planche that there will be many eyes watching him, so he better not disappoint her. Planche clenches his teeth in anger and throws the glass of water on the ground, making the butler and maid panic because he is bleeding. But he just orders them to get out and shouts at them to leave immediately. Then he angrily remembers Callian smiling and red eyes, which makes him even more frustrated and angry. A moment later, the people outside the palace were cheering for the king and congratulating him on his birthday. Inside the carriage was the queen, who was watching people shouting blessings to the king's future and looking at the princes while shouting for them to bring prosperity and glory to Kairos. One of the kids pointed to the princes and told his father that all the princes had come out, and the one at the very back was the one he wanted to see so badly, and it was Prince Callian. Yan called him and worriedly asked him how his body was, but Yan was relieved while telling him that it was a relief that his complexion looked better than yesterday. He replied that it was because he rested well, but he guessed maybe it was because he consumed the antidote and he felt that his breathing had gotten easier, and the pain in his heart had decreased. But then Yan was upset because today's plans were too much, and after the parade, a horseback riding show, and then a ball, he wondered what if Callian got another nosebleed at that rate. But he just simply told Yan that he worried too much and still, he could meet the subjects in good condition. Suddenly, he noticed silver hairs on the backs of the people, and he was shocked because he saw that one of them was Kiri, who died for him. He recognized Kiri immediately, and Raven noticed his reaction, then looked in the direction he was staring. Then Raven lifted its feet up and was about to walk toward the direction he was looking, making Yan panic and ask why Raven was suddenly acting up. He ordered Raven to go forward while Yan asked him if it was because there was something over there. He looked at them walking away and told Raven no. Then he asked it if it felt it too but told it that they couldn't go right now. Then he told Kiri to just wait because he would find him. A moment later, in front of the plaza, Melfir Paulun Emporium's owner, told the king that he was so honored to be able to serve him like it, and that they had prepared a performance that would satisfy him, making him realize that it was Baron Melfir who had prepared the horseback riding show instead of the Bryson family. But he was grateful for it because he got swept away in a useless war of nerves. But it doesn't concern him anyway, and he thinks if his memory serves him right, Randall gets hurt in that horse riding show, and Baron Paulun gets hung. Baron smilingly led them the way and told them that he had prepared special seats for them. He looked around and noticed the chandeliers that were going to fall. He thought it was kind of weird because at an event that the king himself was attending, he knew that the knights would have checked something as big as it, and in a situation where the Bryson family's panel Knight Corps are on standby. But he was upset because thinking of the Pable Knight Corps reminds him of that annoying commander, but he smiled wondering if he should give Baron the opportunity to live. Then Baron happily led his way and told him that if anything felt off, he would do his best to fix it. Then he whispered to Baron that he felt uneasy about the chandelier above his head and ordered Baron to examine it. Then he walked toward his seat, leaving Baron confused. Baron looked at the chandelier above in confusion. A minute later, the horse riding show started, and the horses and their owners performed well. On the other hand, Baron excitedly thought that finally, to think a day like this would come for him to have the honor to sit next to the king, was truly unbelievable. Baron thought since he had prepared so much, he couldn't miss out on that opportunity. But then he felt someone staring behind him, so he looked back and saw Callian uninterestedly watching the show. Then Baron remembered the ceiling and wondered if he should check the chandelier. Well guys, that's the end of the video. If you like this video, comment part 2 in the comment section. Also subscribe to the channel, hit the bell and like the video. Thank you for watching and see you next time again.